Good morning and a happy Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, happy 15th of Shvat. A special and unique kind of holiday or Yom Tov, celebration of renewal. And as we saw in the video last night between Menachem that we're speaking about the significance of this day and how we celebrate not when we have complete fruit, but only when the trees start to have sap. Which means really at the early potential stages, not even when the trees start to bud, but even earlier, not when the fruits start to bud, but even just when the trees contain the potential. And we celebrate it by eating fruit, which means the fruit we're eating is from last year. And the idea is reminding you that even though things look small and you're just starting out and it looks like there's big tasks ahead, to look at the products you have and say, well, that's because sometime back again, you had potential. So there's new potential as well now. Right? You're eating a fruit. If it's an esrog, it's 3 years. If it's a date, it's 70 years. Right? The famous story in the Gemara about the Chenia Magal, who asked someone why he's planting dates. If it takes him 70 years, he's an older man, he's not going to survive to see it. Someone did it for me, I'm doing it for the next generation. Right? So looking at an immense task ahead, to remember that there's all the potential necessary to achieve what you have to is already there, even before you started. And everything you have is because once upon a time, there was potential that someone cultivated. And you too have that potential to cultivate and go forward. So it's very unique and, I'm going to say encouraging Yom Tov. Okay, with that, let's get into the Gemara here. And the Gemara here is, we're going to have to keep our thinking caps on. So let's bring us to where we are at the moment. We have two mitzvahs we're looking at. The egla ruf and the paraduma, the red heifer and the decapitated calf. And the law is distinct between the two in that the egla rufa is not invalidated by a mum, whereas the paraduma is.
What's that word? Mum?
Mum, blemish. Sorry, I'll do the English. The egla rufa is not, what's the word? Not invalidated, disqualified, not invalidated, disqualified by a blemish, whereas the paraduma is. And what we want to do is we want to derive using a kal v'chomer one to the other. How much to the more so? If egla rufa is stringent in that the calf beyond a certain age, I said it was 1 year. By divine providence, on Friday, the study cycle of 3 chapters a day of Rambam studied the 3 chapters of Rambam that discuss the laws of egla rufa, which, God willing, when we come to the conclusion of the Gemara, we'll go through the 3 chapters to kind of recap and see the final conclusions and some details that come from the Tosefta as free of mothers that are not in the Gemara, so we can get a full, complete picture.
Yesterday's one chapter a day talked about how many judges you need for egla rufa.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
5.
Right, 5, but
well,
which chapter? Sanhedrin.
Sanhedrin.
I see. Yeah, very good. So there you go. So, if I remember correctly, there's a dispute if it's 1 or if it's 1 year old or 2 years old. Machlekes elsewhere.
Oh.
Anyway, okay. So when it comes to egla rufa, there's a stringency there in that the age is a factor, and by paraduma, age is not a factor. So if paraduma, which is more lenient because it doesn't make a difference, the age is not a factor, and yet it still has a stringency that a blemish disqualifies, then we tried to argue, should not egla rufa also have that stringency, considering that to begin with it's more stringent on the age factor? Right, that was the Gemara's suggestion. To which the
age factor
as the baseline of what's more stringent and what's not.
To say that you should grab the stringency of the.
That's correct.
The paraduma.
That's correct. Because the egla rufa to begin with is more stringent, considering the age factor. To which the Gemara responded, well, when it comes to the blemish that disqualifies the paraduma, the pasuk says, "Asher ein ba mum," it has no blemish. It is disqualified by blemish, but not something else, not the egla rufa. So that disqualifies or prevents us from using the how much or the more so. Because in the issue of blemish, the Torah says exclusively here, but in it, there's no blemish. So don't transfer that somewhere else. So to which the Gemara said, if that's the case, then we should not be able to transfer from egla rufa to paraduma, which we do. How's that? Because in egla rufa, the Torah says two things. Number one, it was not drawn with a yoke. That's the second thing the Torah says. But the first thing the Torah says, asher lo yu'bad ba. It was not worked. No work was done with it. Better translated. And elsewhere, Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rav, teaches us that this statement, no work was done with it, expanding the prohibition of work to beyond yoke, but any work, that is transferred to paraduma. But put on paraduma's level. Paraduma's level is, don't even place the yoke on it. Never mind, no work. Don't even place it on. Which then means, don't place anything on a paraduma. And that is transferred from the egla rufa to the paraduma. To which the Gemara challenges, well, if your premise is you can't transfer when you have a word ba, because it says in it and not something else, when it comes to the no work on the paradum, but the egla rufa, it also says ba, that no work was done with it. It should prevent you from
placing, not drawing.
The main point here is that you shouldn't transfer the expansion of work beyond yoke. Because it comes to paradum, it only says placing of yoke, not other things. And we expanded that definition because we take it from the egla rufa. Right? But the egla rufa
definition onto paraduma, but you shouldn't.
You shouldn't because the Torah says ba.
Transfer for paraduma.
The reason why I didn't transfer paraduma to egla rufa is because the Torah says ba by paraduma, by blemish of paraduma. So then don't transfer from the work of egla rufa to paraduma because the Torah says ba in it by the work of paraduma, by the work of egla rufa. So the Gemara said, well, no. The word ba in it prevents you from doing the how much of the more so, prevents you from doing the kal v'chomer. But in the case of bringing the definition of work from egla rufa over to paraduma, to expand it beyond yoke, we have a gzeira shava. And what a gzeira shava does is, it's not a logical deduction. We logically derive that if the law applies here, it should also apply there. Then the pasuk ba can prevent you from doing that, which is how we try to learn from paraduma to egla rufa about blemish, using the logic of kal v'chomer, and the word ba by paraduma prevented us from doing that. But when it comes to learning that paraduma is prohibited beyond just yoke by taking from egla rufa, we did that with a gzeira shava. And a gzeira shava is like to take the law and bring it here. Not by logic, but by Torah dictation. By the transmission of tradition going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, that this law is to be transposed into this law. And thus, the fact that it says ba is of irrelevance. It's as if it's written in the verses of paraduma. This is what the Gemara left us with. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So now the Gemara says like this. Where the line begins with the word me'agala, or me'egla, and the second word is egla. So you'll see me'egla, egla. How many lines? Maybe 15 or so. I didn't count, but Memvav Aleph 46a. The line begins with the word me'egla, and then the second word is egla. So it will kind of look like you'll be able to see it because it says egla, egla. Memvav Aleph 46a. Yeah. So if we are establishing that there's a gzeira shava between paraduma and egla rufa, and that transcends the fact that Torah says ba in it, because an gzeira shava tells us that it says if those words are written in the other place, so it transcends the word ba, which prevents you from logically deducing one to the other, because this is not a logical dictation. This is by divine design of the tradition that there's a Gzera Shava. Gzera Shava. So the rule of Gzera Shava is when two sets of laws share the same word, then that's an indication that they share common laws. But this isn't done by rationale, meaning you can't open the psukim and find two random set of laws that are the same random word and say, oh, Gzera Shava, start teaching laws to each other. It has to go back by tradition to Moshe Rabbeinu, which means this tradition, if it were a logical deduction, then you use logic itself to prevent that deduction. In the case of Kal V'chomer, Kal V'chomer is a logical deduction. If one thing is more stringent and it has a leniency, then the one that's more lenient certainly has a leniency, or the reverse. If something is lenient and has a stringency, then the one that's stringency for sure has a stringency, right? It's a logical deduction. So when the verse gives you a word that prevents you from doing a logical transference, then you don't do the logical transference, because that's the logic of how you read, right? Torah says in it, and not something else. Okay, even though you have some other logic to counter that. But if the Torah is telling, if Moshe Rabbeinu from Hashem is telling you, these two laws teach each other things, so take the words from here and put them into here. So you can't look at the words and say, well, no, you can't do that. Hashem said, do that. Yeah.
How did the sages knew what verses went?
By tradition. Rashi elsewhere discusses, and the Gemara discusses this elsewhere, as to what exactly the tradition is. And again, I'm going to make a plug for that book, Introduction to Talmud, where there it explains Gzera Shava as well. Explains all 13 principles and explains Gzera Shava. And the basic idea is that sometimes the tradition is that these words are Gzera Shava. You go figure out what the laws are to be derived.
Oh, so you're given words, but you're not necessarily given the text, the verses.
No, you are given the verses, and you're told that these words and these verses are Gzera Shava, but you aren't taught which laws are derived from each other. You're just told that these words are Gzera Shava. The word oil appears here using our text. The word oil appears here, oil meaning yoke, and the word oil yoke appears here, and therefore there's a Gzera Shava to learn from each other. Which laws are to be derived from each other? You go figure it out. But that's a tradition. That could be one version. Sometimes you have a tradition that says X law is learned by Gzera Shava. Now go figure out which word it is that's causing the Gzera Shava. Sometimes the tradition is these two sets of laws of Gzera Shava. Go figure out which word and go figure out which laws. So these varying different traditions cause for analysis amongst the sages as to what's to be derived and what's not to be derived, using all the principles of how Gzera Shava themselves is thought to be operated. Like with everything. In everything in Gemara is a combination of interpretation and Hashem's instruction. So Hashem gives you the tools of how to interpret. Now go interpret. So you have to do interpretation, but you also have to use Hashem's tools, making it the perfect conversation. Hashem speaks and you speak. That's right. So that's why it's this conversation. That's the whole point here. Hashem doesn't want to just give us instructions and we follow like robots. He wants to converse with us. So in every learning, there's Hashem's words, and then there's your words, so to speak. There's your contribution to the conversation. So Hashem gives you the tools of learning. That's Hashem's contribution to the conversation. And then you take the tools and learn. That's your contribution to the conversation. And thus we have this huge library of generations of people involved in this conversation with Hashem. Right? It's the idea. Okay. So now that we have a Gzera Shava, which transcends the rationale that prevents you from transferring using the word ba. Right? The word ba is a prevention. In it, not somewhere else. But the Gzera Shava transcends that. If that's the case, then Egla, the Egla Rufa Nami as well, Tasi should be derived, oil, mipara. Use the same Gzera Shava of the two words, oil, yoke, appearing in Paradoma, and the word oil, yoke, appearing in Egla Rufa, should help us transfer the law that says that a blemish disqualifies a Paradoma. Transfer that using the Gzera Shava to Egla Rufa, that Egla Rufa should also be disqualified by a blemish. In the same way you said that we take the prohibition of work to be expanded beyond yoke from the Egla Rufa, and transpose that into paraduma to say that paraduma also is forbidden when there's work other than yoke. So go the other way, because ger shava works both ways.
Share common word too.
This is the very laws. Egla rufa and paraduma share common law, common word, yoke. And in that situation, it's ger shava, as is always the case, is not one directional. It's what's the word? Bidirectional. It's both directions, right? This side teaches that side, and that side teaches that side. That's the rules of almost all ger shava, bilateral. So if we're taking from egla rufa, transcending the word ba, and bringing it into paraduma, and saying paraduma cannot do any work and not just the yoke, so then do the same thing. Paraduma, the Torah says blemish disqualifies, transfer that to egla. So don't use the kal v'chomer, which is prevented by the word ba. Use the gzer shava because we have one.
Allows you to take all the expansive meaning of what's being transferred over.
That's correct. Again, limited to what the tradition it is. And clearly the tradition here is that you have these words oil that teach you something, and now go figure out what it is. So the Gemara is therefore saying, well, why not take the gzer shava and go both directions? Right? So to which the Gemara responds and says, I have to rethink this. There could be other ways of learning the Gemara, but I'm going with this way because I think this is the correct way of learning. The Gemara says, like, okay, we follow the Gemara's logic at the moment. If we have a gzer shava, go both directions. In the same way we took the gzer shava and said that work is expanded in egla rufa to be beyond yoke, and we transfer that to paraduma to say it's beyond yoke. So likewise, go the other direction. Paraduma is disqualified by blemish. Bring that to egla rufa and say egla rufa is disqualified by blemish. That's it. Now the Gemara is saying like this. Okay, hold on a second. The word ba actually does prevent you from transferring even a gzer shava. Well, if that's the case, both of them have the word ba, and you can't go either way. So the Gemara therefore is going to say, well, no. The word ba by egla rufa, no. Yes, the word ba by egla rufa is free. It's already been used. Sorry, the word ba by egla rufa has already been used for something else, and therefore you can transfer the law of work beyond yoke to paraduma. But by paraduma, the word ba is free, and therefore it is there to prevent you from transferring the law of mum the other way. So that's the Gemara of the exercise now, is to see why the word ba is free in paraduma, and thus is used to prevent you from transferring mum, but not free in egla rufa, and therefore it does not prevent you from transferring the expansion of a definition of work or paraduma. Exactly right. That's what we're about to do right now. So says the Gemara, no, the reason why we're not transferring the law of blemish from paraduma to egla rufa is because hamir rachmana, the Torah prevented us from doing that with the word ba, with the word in it. To which the Gemara says, but by egla not miksiv ba. By egla it also says ba, preventing.
That was for the
preventing the definition of work to go beyond yoke. With me? No, it's a lot. Okay, that's why I gave the conclusion before. So let's think of it this way. The Torah says, okay, that there's two laws that we have to go in two directions, right?
Right.
So let's see what the laws are. Paraduma has blemish as a prevention, and egla rufa has the expansion of work to be beyond yoke. Okay, we're trying to transfer them both bilaterally, and to say that blemish is a disqualifier for egla rufa, just like paraduma, and that paraduma expands the definition of work to be beyond yoke, just like egla rufa. That's the direction, right? So we're saying like this. It actually only goes unilaterally. Egla rufa transfers to paraduma that work is beyond yoke, but paraduma does not transfer to egla rufa that blemish is a disqualifier. Why? Answer. Well, because the Torah here says ba. It is disqualified by blemish, and if that's not transferred to egla rufa, right? But when it says that work is beyond yoke in egla, it also says ba in it. So why are we transferring it the other way? To which the Gemara says, well, no, because this word ba is being used for something else. And because it's being used for something else, therefore the law is transferred because the ba is tied up. That's it. That's what we are.
I thought you had something else.
No, I was just using the words of the Gemara to get to this conclusion. which is the Gemara said, well, we're not transferring. The Gemara said it. Well, why don't you transfer why don't you transfer the paraduma over to Eglah Rufa? Oh, well, it says ba. To which the Gemara says, well, it says ba here too. No, this ba is tied up already.
The one for paraduma is not tied up.
Correct.
Therefore, you can't transfer over.
That's right. It's not tied up, and therefore it's being used to prevent the transfer. Whereas the one from Eglah Rufa is already tied up, and therefore it cannot be used to prevent the transfer. So now, why is it tied up?
Doesn't the Gemara disagree with that?
So that's why I said that I think
That's where you were going. I thought you had said after that the Gemara rejected that and was giving another reason.
No.
No?
Oh, what the Gemara did was the Gemara rejected the idea that Gzera Shava transcends ba. Earlier we said that Gzera Shava transcends the word ba, and that ba only prevents a kavul chaimer, but doesn't prevent. There's no sound working here. Test. Oh, come on. Was it working here? Did I press some button? Working? Oh, we are working. Okay. So I was saying that initially I said that the word ba, that the Gzera Shava transcends the word ba.
Right, but no.
But the Gemara is rejecting that and saying that ba does prevent the Gzera Shava,
It's tied up.
but only if it's not tied up.
Right.
If it's already tied up, then it cannot be used to prevent the Gzera Shava because it's being used for something else. So therefore, in the Eglah Rufa, the word ba is being used for something else. Therefore, we could transfer the law to paraduma. But by paraduma, where the ba is not being used for something else, it prevents the transfer. That's what we're holding in the Gemara. So where we are at is now, yeah. So I think phrase it wrong. Where we are now is, thank you, that we have to discover why the word ba, it, in Eglah Rufa is being tied up. What's it being used? And therefore, because it's tied up, therefore it allows for the transference of that law into paraduma.
Is it tied up?
That's correct. This is what we're going to go to tomorrow.
Oh.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Somewhat
right.
clear? It's like with me somewhat? We're going to recap again tomorrow. But this is... yeah. This is the exercise of connecting with Hashem using our minds. Hashem bless it with the mind. He says this all the time, but we have to remind ourselves of this because we can get carried away. It's actually one of the points of the Maimer from Yitzhak that we were learning. One of the points that it makes in that discourse is that a person can get carried away with the logic of Torah and be so enamored by the logical system and forget that the main point here is Hashem's Torah. The main point here is that we've been given a logic. Because we've been given a logic, or reverse, we've been given a logic for the purposes of breaking our logic and pushing the limits of our logic to understand as best we can Hashem's Torah. A person can get carried away with the excitement of the logic and forget that this is Hashem's logic.
What does that mean? Hashem's logic then? What are we supposed to do with take from that?
Nothing, just change the way we think about it. First of all, there's a little humility. We don't get arrogant when we're excited with how much we understand. It's about Hashem's Torah. But even just the thinking itself, even just the acknowledgement that this is Hashem's Torah allows Hashem to be part of the exercise here, not just me pursuing my own intellectual pursuit because, wow, look how beautiful this is intellectually speaking. It's Hashem's Torah. That's the primary thing here. And we've been lucky enough to be able to use the little bit of a seichel, a little bit of brains we have to understand Hashem's logic.
We're lucky enough to have someone like you that teaches us.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Try my best. I appreciate it. Have a good day and good Yom Tov.